Scene 1 of the Rose Retreat establishes a deceptively gentle setting that immediately reveals itself as a charged emotional landscape, one that feels deeply familiar to queer audiences who understand that spaces promising healing often become places where buried truths surface. The retreat itself is framed not as a gimmick but as a sanctuary built on vulnerability, and Dr. Flowers stands as a compelling embodiment of that contradiction. A woman who has mastered the language of love and self-actualization for others while quietly carrying unresolved grief of her own. Her poise, competence, and authority read as aspirational on the surface, yet the ache beneath them signals a truth many women recognize: that being emotionally articulate does not exempt someone from loneliness, and that caretakers are often the most practiced at hiding their wounds. Jayden's role as both assistant and confidant reinforces this theme, showing a form of chosen family and emotional labor that queer women frequently shoulder for one another, especially when formal roles or professional boundaries might otherwise discourage intimacy. When Jayden leads the first session with Maria and Jezebel, the film gently shifts its focus from expertise to experience, centering the participants' uncertainty rather than prescribing answers, and this choice grounds the scene in authenticity rather than performance. Maria and Jezebel arrive carrying different but parallel forms of heartbreak, united by the belief that love has somehow eluded them. A sentiment that resonates strongly within LGBTQ+ communities where many women are taught to interpret difficulty in love as personal failure rather than the result of social constraint or delayed self-recognition. Jayden's assertion that love can come from either is delivered without spectacle, and that restraint matters because it mirrors how queer possibility often enters women's lives not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet suggestion that unsettles long-held assumptions. Jezebel's stunned reaction to the question of whether she has ever been with a woman captures a moment of psychic rupture that feels achingly real, the kind where curiosity and fear collide before language can catch up, and the film wisely allows her silence to speak, honoring the complexity of that internal reckoning rather than rushing it toward resolution. For lesbian and questioning viewers, this moment may recall the first time someone named an option they had never allowed themselves to fully consider, not because it was unimaginable, but because it felt forbidden, risky, or incompatible with the version of themselves they were taught to maintain. Maria, by contrast, occupies the role of gentle catalyst rather than confident guide, and her confession that she has kissed a girl before is not framed as expertise, but as openness, positioning her not above Jezebel but alongside her, equally uncertain and equally hopeful. Their later conversation, away from the structured safety of the session, becomes the emotional heart of the scene, because it is here that attraction surfaces not through overt declaration, but through attention, admiration, and the vulnerability of asking a sincere question. Maria's acknowledgement of Jezebel's beauty is tender rather than objectifying, and Jezebel's discomfort is treated with respect rather than judgment, reflecting a dynamic many queer women recognize, where desire is negotiated slowly with care, especially when one person is encountering it for the first time. The suggestion to try to kiss a girl is offered not as a dare or a joke, but as an experiment in self-knowledge, emphasizing curiosity over outcome, which challenges society's tendency to frame women's same-sex intimacy as either performative or definitive rather than exploratory and personal. This scene quietly resists the cultural discomfort surrounding women expressing love for each other by refusing to sensationalize the possibility. Instead, it treats it as a legitimate avenue of connection worthy of thought and consent. That discomfort persists largely because women's desire, particularly when it exists outside male frameworks, threatens entrenched narratives about femininity, stability, and relational hierarchy. And the Rose Retreat counters this by centering women's interior lives rather than external validation. Dr. Flowers' unseen grief echoes through the scene as a reminder that even those who have figured it out are still shaped by loss, suggesting that the retreat is not about fixing broken women but about creating space for honesty, a distinction that feels radical in a culture that often demands women heal quietly and quickly. The symbolic roles of the women interlock. Meaningfully, Dr. Flowers represents unresolved love. Jayden embodies quiet devotion and emotional stewardship. Maria carries curiosity and courage, and Jezebel holds the weight of unspoken longing, together forming a spectrum of queer experience that resists simplification. For women viewers broadly, the scene speaks to the exhaustion of performing certainty in love and the relief of admitting confusion, while for LGBTQ+ audiences, it offers something rarer still: a portrayal of becoming visible that is patient, compassionate, and grounded in emotional truth rather than spectacle. By ending the scene not with action but with possibility, the film affirms that sometimes the most transformative moments in a love story are the ones where a woman first allows herself to wonder, sincerely and without shame, who she might be if she let herself feel. Scene 2 unfolds as a quiet emotional reckoning, placing Dr. Flowers alone with her longing until Aiden's unexpected presence ruptures the room, reminding viewers how queer love often reappears without warning, carrying hope and dread simultaneously. Especially for women trained to read reunion as redemption rather than unresolved grief cycles. Flower's immediate rush toward Aiden, arms open and heart exposed, captures a deeply familiar queer impulse to believe endurance will be rewarded. Yet Aiden's stiff refusal punctures that fantasy, showing how consent, even within shared history, must be renegotiated, not assumed, particularly for women taught emotional labor equals entitlement myths. Aiden's declaration that it is over is not cruel but deliberate, reflecting the painful clarity many queer women eventually claim when survival requires separation, and her request to be let go challenges romantic narratives that frame persistence as love, instead honoring boundaries as acts of care, autonomy, and mutual preservation. Flower's willingness to accept Aiden's decision despite visible devastation centers a rarely celebrated strength, the capacity to love without possession, resonating with audiences who recognize how queer women are often pressured to minimize pain to appear evolved, composed, and supportive even when their inner worlds are fracturing under cultural scrutiny. The intimate handhold that follows reframes touch as memory rather than seduction, illustrating how physical closeness between women can hold layered meanings of safety, farewell, and recognition, something society struggles to read without sexualizing, thereby erasing the emotional literacy queer women develop through loss, patience, and restraint over time gently. Aiden's suggestion of making love one last time is presented less as temptation than confession, exposing how desire can coexist with finality, and how women may seek embodied closure when language fails, a nuance often denied to lesbian stories which are flattened into cautionary or sensational tropes by mainstream culture. For LGBTQ+ viewers, this moment echoes lived experiences of loving someone through endings, where affection is not erased by separation, and where choosing softness amid rupture becomes an act of resistance against cultural scripts demanding bitterness, rivalry, or emotional austerity after relationships between women conclude quietly, bravely, with dignity always. Women more broadly may recognize themselves in Flower's attempt to lower her gaze, hiding pain to protect another's comfort. A learned behavior reinforced by expectations that women manage emotional fallout privately, while maintaining composure, professionalism, and generosity even when confronting profound personal loss, without acknowledgement, space, or relief from others. Society's discomfort with scenes like this stems from an inability to contextualize women's love outside ownership or spectacle, leaving little room for depictions of tenderness, grief, and desire coexisting, especially when no male presence mediates meaning or legitimizes the emotional exchange unfolding on-screen for audiences conditioned otherwise by tradition alone. Aiden's role is neither villain nor savior, but a woman asserting her right to live honestly, illustrating how queer breakups often demand courage from both parties, one to release, the other to endure, without rewriting love as failure or invalidating what was once sustaining for their shared histories deeply felt. Flowers symbolizes the cost of loving deeply while holding authority, embodying the tension queer women face between competence and vulnerability. While Aiden represents the bravery of choosing oneself without cruelty, together reflecting relational ethics grounded in truth rather than endurance for endurance's sake within queer emotional landscapes shared collectively often. This scene refuses fantasy by allowing love to be complicated, unresolved, and still meaningful, offering representation that values emotional honesty over tidy closure, and reminding viewers that visibility does not require perfection, only the courage to be seen in one's fullness, especially during endings marked by care, mutual respect always. For lesbian audiences seeking authenticity, the power lies not in the proposition itself, but in the trembling pause around it, where history, desire, and self-respect intersect, affirming that even goodbyes can hold intimacy without exploitation, shame, or erasure, when women center consent and empathy deeply always present together fully here. Ultimately, the scene becomes a meditation on loving well, even at the end, challenging viewers to honor relationships without clinging, and to recognize that queer women's stories deserve space for nuance, dignity, and emotional complexity beyond simplistic moral framing that often governs mainstream romantic narratives, harshly limiting depth and truth. In centering restraint, consent, and vulnerability, the film offers a quiet advocacy for lesbians and women alike, affirming that their emotional realities matter, their endings are valid, and their love, even unfinished, is worthy of tenderness and respect within cultures still learning to listen attentively without judgment or fear today. By closing on shared pain rather than spectacle, this scene insists that becoming visible is not about being chosen, but about choosing honesty, and that truth, once spoken between women, burns quietly yet enduringly bright as testament to love, lived bravely beyond expectation, memory loss healing time together alone still. Scene 3 centers on a therapy session between Jaden and Val, unfolding as a quiet, intimate exchange where storytelling, vulnerability, and curiosity become the real catalyst for change, rather than spectacle or shock. Jayden begins by disarming the room with honesty about her own past, describing herself as an awkward outsider who only discovered confidence and self-recognition later in life, a confession that reframes authority not as superiority but as lived experience. For queer audiences, this matters because so many women encounter their identities in fragments, late awakenings, or quiet realizations that bloom only after years of self-doubt. Val's response, describing unsatisfying encounters with men, is not framed as crude or explicit, but as a recognition of mismatch, of touch that never quite listened, echoing a common experience for women who are taught to endure discomfort rather than question it. Jayden's gentle inquiry about whether Val has ever been with a woman lands not as provocation but as permission, a door quietly opening to possibilities Val has never allowed herself to imagine. That moment captures the emotional heart of the scene, the realization that desire can be named without being rushed, and that curiosity itself is not a failure of morality but an invitation to self-knowledge. For lesbian and questioning viewers, Val's surprise mirrors the internal jolt many feel the first time someone asks the right question, the one that finally aligns with a long-silenced truth. The therapy setting adds complexity, highlighting how trust and safety are prerequisites for emotional discovery, especially for women navigating social expectations that frame heterosexuality as default and deviation as risk. Rather than exploiting that dynamic, the scene emphasizes conversation, listening, and reflection, centering consent and interiority over action. This restraint challenges a culture uncomfortable with seeing women explore desire through dialogue rather than spectacle, particularly when no male gaze is present to frame the interaction. Women watching may recognize themselves in Val's hesitation, the fear of naming wants that could rearrange a life, disappoint others, or challenge identities carefully constructed for safety. Jayden's role becomes symbolic of queer mentorship, where guidance comes not from answers but from asking better questions and modeling self-acceptance. Her own history as a late bloomer undercuts myths that queer certainty must arrive early or loudly, offering reassurance that discovery at any age is valid. The scene also speaks to women more broadly, particularly those who have learned to tolerate relationships that never quite fit, mistaking endurance for success. By allowing Val to voice dissatisfaction without shame, the film quietly critiques social narratives that reward women for silence and accommodation. Society's discomfort with scenes like this persists because it unsettles familiar hierarchies, presenting women as agents of their own desire rather than objects of pursuit. When women ask each other honest questions, the illusion of compulsory norms weakens, revealing how much has been built on unexamined assumptions. The emotional intimacy here is quiet but radical, rooted in the courage to listen inward and speak outward. For LGBTQ+ audiences seeking authenticity, the power of the scene lies in its patience, in showing that becoming visible does not require certainty, only honesty and care. Jaden and Val's interaction mirrors real-world pressures on queer women to justify their feelings, to prove them worthy or permanent before they are allowed to exist. Instead, the film offers a gentler truth. Desire can begin as a question, and that question alone can be transformative. In refusing to sensationalize discovery, the scene affirms that women's inner lives deserve space, dignity, and complexity, reminding viewers that love, curiosity, and self-recognition are not taboos but human experiences, and that telling these stories with care is itself a form of advocacy for lesbians and all women still learning to trust their own feelings in a world that too often teaches them to doubt them. By ending on openness rather than resolution, the film honors process over performance, leaving audiences with a sense of possibility rather than instruction, a quiet assurance that even the most tentative step toward truth can be enough to change a life, and that seeing women choose curiosity over fear remains a powerful act of visibility today, tomorrow, and for all who are still listening for the courage to ask themselves the same question Val hears for the first time here, quietly, bravely, and without shame at last, as women continue finding language for desire, beyond expectation, discovering freedom within gentleness and truth alone together, always forward, softly choosing care daily, patiently visible, finally present, openly heard, known, valued, equal, safe, warm, brave, whole, real, alive. Now today, here together, still becoming more fully human through shared understanding and quiet courage, each moment lived honestly without apology ever again, for love, curiosity, truth, growth, care, trust, hope, belonging, freedom, visibility, dignity, respect, empathy, connection, meaning, grace, enduring. Scene 4 unfolds with a quiet intentionality that mirrors the deeper aims of the Rose Retreat itself, positioning Liz and Vanna not as subjects of intervention, but as women whose healing begins when they are finally seen without judgment or urgency. And the decision by Dr. Flowers and Jayden to place them together is less a clinical maneuver than an act of faith and relational care, recognizing that sometimes growth happens not through structured exercises but through shared presence. The discussion between Flowers and Jayden establishes the emotional landscape of the retreat, where progress is measured not by performative breakthroughs, but by subtle shifts in openness, and Flowers' lingering grief over Aiden underscores a central theme of the film. Even those tasked with guiding others are still navigating unfinished love and loss, reminding viewers that healing is not linear or hierarchical. When Liz and Vanna are identified as struggling, it is not framed as failure but as a signal that their pain is quieter, more internalized, shaped by withdrawal and survival rather than disruption, which many queer women will recognize as the safest way to endure in environments that have historically punished vulnerability. Their shared room becomes a liminal space, neither therapy nor isolation, where two women carrying different but resonant wounds are invited to coexist without expectation. Liz's hesitance, marked by her tendency to retreat inward, reflects the experience of women who have learned to protect themselves by becoming invisible, while Vanna's guardedness, shaped by an abusive past, speaks to the careful calibration of trust required when safety has been repeatedly violated. Their initial awkwardness is not played for humor or tension, but honored as a natural part of connection, allowing viewers to witness how intimacy often begins, not with chemistry, but with listening. As they talk about why they came to the retreat, the film resists summarizing their trauma, instead emphasizing the relief of being able to speak honestly without interruption, advice, or scrutiny, which itself becomes a form of healing rarely afforded to women, particularly queer women whose stories are often dismissed as secondary or exaggerated. Vanna's offer to sleep on the floor is deeply symbolic, illustrating how survivors of abuse frequently minimize their needs to avoid conflict or imposition, while Liz's insistence on sharing the bed is not a romantic gesture but a quiet refusal to let another woman diminish herself, signaling a shift from isolation toward mutual care. The physical proximity of sharing a bed is treated with tenderness and restraint, focusing not on bodies but on the emotional weight of choosing closeness after long periods of distance, fear, or self-protection. For lesbian and broader LGBTQ+ audiences, this moment resonates as a familiar threshold, where desire is intertwined with caution, and where longing is tempered by the need for safety and consent. The heat that builds between Liz and Vanna is emotional rather than explicit, arising from recognition and shared humanity, challenging the assumption that queer connection must be justified through spectacle or intensity to be valid. Women watching may see themselves in the way both characters negotiate vulnerability, wanting connection yet wary of repeating past harm, a balance many learn through necessity rather than choice. Society's discomfort with scenes like this often stems from an inability to read women's intimacy outside of sexualized frameworks, leaving little room to understand how shared space, conversation, and mutual respect can be profoundly intimate acts. By centering emotional resonance over physical action, the film pushes back against narratives that either sanitize queer relationships into platonic ambiguity or sensationalize them into taboo, offering instead a truthful middle ground where love grows slowly and deliberately. Liz and Vanna's interaction also mirrors real-world pressures on queer women to justify their desire, especially after trauma, as though wanting connection must be earned through healing milestones or external approval. Here, the retreat's philosophy quietly affirms that readiness is not a checklist but a feeling, and that choosing to share space is itself an act of courage. The scene further reflects the broader theme of the Rose Retreat, that healing does not always come from looking inward alone but from allowing oneself to be held in another's presence, even tentatively. Dr. Flower's unseen influence lingers, as her own unresolved longing parallels the connections forming among the women she guides, reinforcing the idea that love, loss, and renewal exist on a continuum rather than separate paths. For audiences seeking authenticity, the power of this scene lies in its gentleness, its refusal to rush or define the relationship, and its respect for the characters' inner lives. It advocates for lesbians and women by showing that their stories are worthy of patience, nuance, and care, and that becoming visible does not require grand declarations, only the willingness to sit beside someone else and say, in action if not words, you are not alone. In doing so, the film challenges viewers to reconsider what romance looks like when stripped of performance, reminding us that sometimes the most transformative encounters are the quietest ones, where two women, carrying their pasts, choose to share a bed not for escape, but for connection, safety, and the possibility of something new gently taking root.